Welcome to the K Factor podcast, where we turn up the heat on all things fire protection. Brought to you by the American Fire Sprinkler Association, this podcast sparks conversations about the latest technology, trends, and tools shaping the industry. Join the AFSA tech team as we fan the flames of innovation in fire safety.
We are actually filming from AFSA 44. It is 44, right?
44.
It's 44. Right?
44, that's me.
That's it. So we have a great... Oh, you muted?
Yes.
Producer, huh?
I did that on purpose.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm not an active participant currently.
Well, it is our great pleasure to have Tracey Bellamy, Chief Engineering Officer for Telgian Engineering Consulting. Thanks for being on.
I appreciate you having me. Hopefully I can offer a little some nonsense that maybe helps out here.
Some productive nonsense?
Yeah, productive nonsense.
Sounds like mine every day.
Yeah.
So could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you landed in this interesting industry?
You know, I guess I got a little bit of an interesting story. I was a civil structural engineer coming out of college at University of South Carolina. And looking for a job, couldn't find a job, and a job opening came up at the State Fire Marshal's office in South Carolina. And going to work there, I didn't know nothing about fire codes, nothing about sprinklers, nothing about any of this. And I was handed a set of code books, Standard Building Code, Standard Fire Prevention Code, NFPA 13, 20, all these things, and said, hey, make sure these drawings meet the requirements in all these books. And I started reading the books and actually started to understand them a little bit and got into that or whatever. And I was there about 5 years, and I was really good at enforcement over there. I say good at it. I was really a jerk, maybe. I don't know. I pushed hard. I was taught the words in the book are gospel. You follow them exactly as they're written. Make people do that, right? And I left there and went to the Savannah Riverside Department of Energy facility in Aiken, South Carolina, Augusta, Georgia. And there, the tide flipped on me. I'm working for the owner somewhat, not really, because it's a government, but they had responsibility, right? So now the DOE is applying the enforcement to me. I didn't like that. I was like, whoa, this doesn't feel so good. So
I like being the jerk. I don't like when someone's a jerk.
The shoe's on the other foot, but it opened up this concept to me about why. Why is this requirement even in the standard? What are we trying to achieve? And understand that. And that's really been the mantra, even through coming to Telgian. I was there at Savannah Riverside probably 3 or 4 years. It's a different world out there. You know, things don't get done quick at all. And then came to Thomas Van Rickle and Associates, TV, Fire and Life Safety, Telgian. They had a fire materials group, same group of people. And I've been with those guys. I think it'll be 30 years this March. So it just means I'm old. But everything we've tried to push is that why concept. I think I've had the luxury of working with a group of guys, and you guys know Russ and those that, Russ didn't just, give me the opportunity to make a difference and make changes out there. He demanded it. So get out there. If you think something's wrong, get out there and let's make it better. Let's do what's right. And that to me, about the industry, for me, that's what really drives me to say, hey, I want to improve things. I want to do the right thing. I want the right protection. Not just, hey, we can sell more sprinklers, or nothing wrong with selling more sprinklers, but making sure we're getting it purpose-driven, that we know where we're trying to get, what's the end goal we want. And I continue to do that today. I've tried to, younger kids coming into the industry. I think I was at WPI doing a career fair, and most of the kids that came up to me and would ask about us and what we were doing. I would ask each one of them, do you want to change the world? Do you want to make a difference? Very inspirational kind of whatever, right. But I really mean that. I said, if you don't want to change this industry for the better, don't get in it.
Right. Let's
try to make things better and do the right thing. We got such a huge, good message in what we do. I don't think we promote it. We force people to do things. We're a regulatory industry, right?
So then what's your advice to somebody who says, yeah, I do want to get involved, I do want to make a change? How do you recommend going about that?
Earlier we did something, Jack was in here and said, we talked about involvement with the standards development process. NFPA has, I think, the best standards development process there is out there. But a lot of times people just accept that's what's in the standard, that's just what I have to do. And if you look at something, I asked a question in there, how many of you have ever made a code change? And there were some people that were committee members, and I said, no, other than committee members, who's done this?
It's not fair.
Not you, yeah, not you nerds. No.
But there weren't very many. And then I asked the opposite question somewhat of how many of you ever read something in the standard or code and said, this is ridiculous, or this is not adequate, or this is vague, you know? And nearly everybody will raise their hand. I go, well, you have the luxury of being a part of this. If you want to submit a code change, a public input, go online. It's terrible. You guys know what about. You go there, open it up, and you can edit it the same way you edit a Word document.
NFPA.org is where you can find it.
And on NFPA.org. And one of our younger people here recently asked about getting on a committee, and I said, well, you first got to get involved, I think, with submit some public input, submit some public comments. Or, you know, if you want to be in a committee meeting, you can come as a guest. Show up as a guest. Listen to what we did.
Highly recommend, because those committee meetings, until you get kind of the flow of the meeting and how that Robert's Rules of Orders works, my first couple meetings, I was like, what is happening?
Yes.
It was not as intuitive as I thought, but now that I get the process, it makes a lot of sense. But it probably took a meeting or two for me just to even get my bearings on what is happening in this room.
To understand those rules. Right. And if you do, I think my first NFPA 13 discharge meeting, then quite a few years ago, I came in with maybe 3 or 4, I thought, you know, really good, no nonsense. Yep, this is the right thing to do. We're going to make some good changes. And Jack Thacker, and I don't know if any of you know Jack from years ago. Jack was on the committee, and he wore me out. You know, it's something I didn't understand the process as well and all that, but there was some technical stuff that he went after, and I kind of took a lesson from that. Listen, don't walk in that room and think you know everything, and you're going to school this group of very seasoned people that will help, you know, go in there a little bit humble. But I really think we need the young kids out there are the future. I mean, a lot of times I'm getting older. We're gonna bow out and hopefully fade away gracefully and all that, but they got to get involved. It's not a magical thing that happens. The codes standards don't just happen. You have to participate and get involved. It's available.
At what point in your career did you recognize and do that?
When I was at Savannah Riverside, I had the opportunity to get on NFPA 1 and NFPA 16 at the time. 16 is now part of NFPA 11. And it was just, they were saying, hey, a couple of guys were doing it and said, hey, you ought to just show interest. And I filled out an application and had no idea. I think I picked a couple that were I didn't pick 13 because it's difficult. You know, and people say, well, I submitted an application, I didn't get on. Don't end it there. Get in. But I got on then, and then when I came to TVA, Fire and Life Safety, Thompson and Rickley, Telgian, whatever at that time, Russ and those said, hey, I think you show a propensity to understand this stuff, and they started pushing me to that front, set me on as an alternate, getting on there, and sat and listened and learned this stuff, you know. And I think over time you understand that you can make a difference, and it's quite a good feeling when you go, yeah, I helped create that. I helped make it better, if you will, out there. And but it doesn't happen just like that with a snap.
It's kind of fun to look in the book though and be like, I made that happen.
Yeah,
that was me.
I think somebody the other day posted something about paint on sprinklers or whatever, and about using judgment and that stuff. And they posted it, and I said, yeah, those words seem very familiar to me. I think I may have written those about 1 a.m. the night before the next meeting to get to put it out to the committee. But
so what's detrimental, since you brought it up?
Well, and I've had people argue over that. I think, and I think there's a session here that Carrie Bell's doing about sprinkler testing. Was that today? I don't remember.
I think it might have been.
Yeah, I may not have gone, but I've seen some of the stuff. Detrimental, and the annex language gives some guidance about, let's say, paint, right? And paint on a sprinkler. If you have paint on a frame arm, is that detrimental? I don't think it's going to prevent the thermal element from operating. It won't prevent the plug from releasing. It won't prevent the discharge pattern from developing or the flow from coming out. I think some of these things we should know. If there's a
Right.
speck of paint, if it's up around the seat and you think it might hold the plug in place, I think it's dead. And I really feel like if you use a little bit of different perspective when you look at it, particularly in this industry, if I look at a sprinkler and I say, this is my building, and I'm going to have to pay for this,
And the cost associated.
replacing that one sprinkler is going to cost me $500 because I got to get somebody, they're going to have to drain it down, they're going to have to spend a half a day. And blah, blah. If I know what I know, and I wouldn't say it needs to be replaced, but I would if it was somebody else's money. Yeah, it worries me that our mindset sometimes gets stuck on, hey, probably will replace it. If you don't have to pay for it, your vision's blurred a little bit, I think. It's a judgment call, and if you're uncomfortable, by all means say, I think it needs to be, at the very maybe least, needs to be looked at. Let the owner know, hey, you're getting paid on there, I'm concerned about. The other side of that is like loading. Same thing happens with loading. Same thing happens with corrosion. Same thing applies corrosion on pipe. It used to say, piping shall be free of corrosion. Piping and fittings. What's free mean? When I read it, I said 0. So that was the first one I went after and said, hey, I'm going to add detrimental. And everybody agreed to that. And then but they didn't agree to paint originally.
Okay.
I was, oh, no, you keep it. And I went like, I think when it changed in there the last time, it was like, well, what is paint? It's a form of loading. I don't know if we even have to have a separate paint thing, but there is some language there, and I think each one of us has some common sense, should have some common sense, and should apply that. And if you feel uncomfortable, by all means, say, I don't feel like this is acceptable.
So,
My kind of, go for it.
well, I just wanted to touch a small point on something. We finally made the full circle moment.
For you?
Yes. He talked about he was on NFPA 1.
Oh.
Oh, no.
So Nate's new to the fire sprinkler industry. However, he does have a really big issue with NFPA 1 because Nate loves to grill and smoke.
Smoked meats.
Okay.
Let's not stop the sentence there.
I have the addition.
I didn't even put that together. Briskets and things like that. So
So I in a couple of I think it was a couple episodes back, I talked about I want to meet the person that made that standard because we're gonna have some words.
Oh,
And I was like, oh well.
he's quite a bit bigger than me. This might not interrupt him.
so he's in an apartment and
Yep.
he's pretty good at cooking and he just is not happy that he can't have his
Well,
grill out.
and my knowledge now is that it's been updated. I just need the fire department to use the 2024 edition.
And some of the, like people being neglectful of that, getting the fire out there, putting it up too close to the building. There have been instances.
Oh, for sure. And
it's
I
not-
know people that.
It's not for the person who's knowledgeable, does the right things, puts the fire out, is in constant attendance. It's not intended for those. You're well-minded and you're wanting to do that, right?
Right.
And think, well, you're punishing me. A lot of our codes are like that. They're not for.
Well, Tracy, I haven't tried his brisket yet, so we should do that before we go too far.
Yeah.
Whoa.
That's a fact, though.
You're gonna try to say the Texas boy don't know how to make brisket?
No, bro.
Come on.
We're out of Texas.
So that cuts out for.
We're I'm from Bryan, Texas, or College Station, so south,
Yep.
close to Houston. So don't judge my brisket like that, man.
Oh, I have the same addiction. I've got 2 pellet smokers.
See, he gets it. He gets it. That's perfect.
Ceramic grill, a deep fat fryer, a Blackstone griddle, a pizza oven.
I gotta come to his house.
So
That's where all the fun is.
But and I like a brisket is fun to cook
Oh, for
because
sure.
there's a magic in it. You either get it or you don't. So I've
As
hit
it-
some.
As a Yankee, I'm not sure it's fun, but it's frustrating. And it ends up well, but that stall is crazy.
Yeah, once you get over it, that's
all good.
perfect.
You just gotta ride it out.
Chef's kiss.
What'd you have, Eric? What did you have before NFPA 1?
Before we got sidetracked, I was just gonna say on the loading and the paint and everything, I think a lot of it comes down to what is going to help you sleep well at night, right? Like I think that's where your judgment call has to be. If we're making a judgment call to say no, that's not detrimental. Can I go home and sleep well with that judgment call, or is this something where it's going to kind of keep me up at night saying, I don't know, knowing, did I make the right call? Because I would hate to say, yeah, it's probably fine, and it's not fine. That's what keeps me up. So
I've had some folks say, consider it your mother's house, or your mother's apartment, or your mother's whatever. She's going to be sleeping here tonight. Are you okay with that? Are you comfortable that she'll be safe?
right.
And I think if you really do internalize some of that, and it's all about, for me, do the right thing. Don't try to make somebody replace something because you can benefit out of it financially.
Right.
And be partners with these owners. I think so many times in this industry it's the AHJ against the contractor, against the engineer, against the owner, and we're all think each other are despicable. You're cheap and you don't want to spend money, and you're trying to make extra money. You're trying to cheat. You're trying to over-enforce. And we really are aimed at the same goal: properly protected, adequately protected. Now, I think sometimes we need to think about, what does adequately protected mean? Does that mean compliant with NFPA 13 as an example? I suppose you could believe that, but I don't know that people understand well enough what that even means.
And I think we have to be more situationally based. If we're in a fairly large conference center room right now, if I see paint on a single sprinkler in here, 1 or 2 sprinklers, okay, I'm not going to lose a whole heck of a lot of sleep on it. Versus if this is a nursing home, people are sleeping, they're non-ambulatory, they can't self-evacuate. That's a bigger problem.
Well, that was a change in 25, that like the tables in the annex back there, and Russ Levitt brought some of that forward. He said, listen, you have to use some judgment. If it's going to be in a nursing home, going to be in a hospital versus in here, we are all ambulatory. We will get up, we will move away, 1 sprinkler. But there used to be people that would say, no, it says, But there was a thing in the annex there about a leak in a pipe. It says the drip, that's a non-critical deficiency, or I think it's a critical deficiency because it was dripping. But if it was spraying, that was an impairment. And I remember I was like going, why is that an impairment? It's spraying water. It doesn't hurt, the system's still gonna work. And they said, well, if it's spraying, somebody's gonna go shut the valve off and impair the system. I said, but I said, okay, then closing the valve is the impairment, not the leaking sprinkler. It might be something that pushed toward that, but you have to use judgment. I've consistently tried to present that out there, and some people like it, some people don't. They're thinking like, I've had people say, I don't want my staff, my inspection staff using judgment. I don't allow them to use judgment because I could get in trouble for that from a liability standpoint. And one of the reasons I look at this judgment thing in the book and say that I feel like it's good is, one, I think you should use it, but from a liability standpoint, the very fact that the standard says to use judgment is an acceptance on the standards part that you might not be right. Judgment is judgment. Judgment's not a fact. Now, there could be bad judgment where you go, oh my God, it was a gommed up bunch of mess on that sprinkler. You knew it wouldn't work, versus a speck of paint or something like that.
And the other thing to remember in this conversation is when we start talking about paint and how it's going to be impactful on the sprinkler system, a lot of times when we're imagining it, we're having the group discussion, we're talking about the speck of paint on the frame arm, we're usually fairly up close to the spring. If I can see a speck of paint from the floor and that thing's 15 feet, 20 feet up in the air, it's not going to get better as I get closer.
Yeah.
If I can see it from here, it's probably not going to get better if I get close.
Absolutely.
So if I'm seeing it, I'm probably going to start calling it out, right? So that's the other perspective part of it. Is like, okay, if I'm seeing it from here, when I get closer, do that closer evaluation, is it going to be better? So maybe that's where we start having that conversation if we need to go further into investigating how is it detrimental? Where are we at having that conversation with the building owner?
And I've literally had, an owner say, hey, I had somebody come out and inspect the building, and they said, I have 100 painted sprinklers. And they said, yeah, I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but the good news is we've got 100 sprinklers back in the shop, and I can get started replacing these today. All I need to do is sign this work order. And you think of it from an owner standpoint. Somebody says, the good news is you can pay me a bunch of money.
For something that isn't going to make me money, statistically speaking, and I hope to never use. Like, I think sometimes we don't grasp that.
There
or
is a-
understand it.
Yeah,
at
there's a
least.
perspective out there, the owners think sprinklers are just a money grab. You know, you're taking money from me. I think we need to do a better job in the industry of promoting the goodness of it. I think for the most part, we sell the cheapest fire protection that an owner can get away with. And I choose the words get away with. They don't even care if it's compliant sometimes. At least that's the surface thing that I see. But as I dig with some customers, particularly ones that have much larger facilities, large DCs, they start going, wait a minute, I show them a fire test. We were at a fire test. They go, oh my God, that was awful. Well, we passed. We only operated 4 sprinklers. You know, fire spread, the actual fire spread was limited to a bay or a bay and a half, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, what about all that smoke? Well, that's what happens.
Yeah.
And that's compliant. And then they said, but if that happens in my 1 million square foot DC, that's probably a $300 million loss because of product. Product can't be sold. Product's got to be scrapped.
Business interruption.
Can we do better? Yes. Maybe you have to add in racks. Maybe. And now I'm trying to sell the best fire protection they can afford as opposed to the cheapest they can get away with. And our industry is ridden on compliance, and 100% compliance has brought us where we're at.
Right.
But why can't we sell better sprinklers, better performance? Sell the best you can get. We do it with everything else, the clothes you wear, the house you live in, the car you drive, the food you eat. We all get there, right? I just feel like people don't understand that fire protection is a necessary evil. I'm made to do it. Who likes to be made to do anything? And I think there's a growing contingent of some of the larger facilities that are willing to spend extra money to be inconvenienced with something like in-rack sprinklers. In-rack sprinklers, in terms of their ability to control, suppress, or even extinguish a fire, which I think we got to think about extinguishment now. Nothing better. You can't do the same thing with ceiling sprinklers, even though we developed ceiling sprinklers and vilified the in-rack because the owners didn't want the in-racks. I mean, I've had so many people as soon as I mentioned it.
Educated enough to live with the in-racks.
Exactly. They don't know what it means. And there's some videos I show where I show a fire test and say, okay, watch this test and just give me your perspective. This is your building, you own it. This is the test, this is how it resulted, what the results were. Would you be happy? Would you feel like you had good protection? And most people look at the video and say, oh my God, that's awful, that's horrible, or gosh, that was not really good. Nobody said, oh, that was phenomenal. And,
As we are. That was a great test.
And,
You know?
and then I flip open NFPA 13, and I said, okay, you see this entry in this table? That entry is a result of that test. So that is compliance. And then I bring up another test of in-rack sprinklers, and got them with a barrier in it, just smashes the fire. And they go, oh my God, that was great. See that entry? That's that entry. They are both 100% compliant. Wouldn't you want that versus that? And they say, yeah. I said, why aren't we selling that? I even think some of the labs should go have tiered performance. You could have a sprinkler that meets the bare minimum. You could have one that's, I'll call that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. Have some metrics along with that. How far did the fire spread? How many sprinklers open? How much smoke was produced? And most folks go, well, I don't think we can sell that. Nobody wants fire protection. Well, we got to figure a way to preach a little better.
The biggest challenge with the in-racks, although they perform significantly better in the fire testing and controlling from that aspect, we're also contending with the damage aspect of water damage claims, which is the bane of pretty much all of our existences, right? But we've seen the forklift drivers in a lot of those warehouses. They're trying to load pallets in and out of those racks as quickly as possible.
Yeah, there are.
And so there's that balancing act of where we're at for both perspectives.
There's some ways certainly to protect the in-racks. Put in a extra front beam that lets, hey, you can't lift the load high enough to get it into the rack. It will hit the sprinkler or hit the pipe. Automated storage and retrieval systems, we're able to design those so they can set a product within a centimeter, millimeters of
Big
exactly.
can of worms, ASRs.
But you know, that's certainly something, you know, we've had the luxury, I've had the luxury of doing a lot of fire tests or being involved in a lot of fire tests and seeing what may work or what may not work. I mean, like the ASRS, I think one time last year we did something here and I put up a recipe, like an old recipe, and me and Russ were doing it. And I said, well, what we're seeing happen right now, I think, is these new ASRS systems are going in with, whether they be mini load, top loading, side loading, you name it out there. People are trying to shoehorn it into NFPA 13. And I said, it's like taking a recipe and then changing the ingredients and expecting to get the same phenomenal meal. You're just not going to do that. And what scares me with ASRS is every one of these guys is different.
So different.
I know, you know, 834 West, they've got some really good guidance there, but there's systems out there that genius in terms of material handling, but they haven't thought about what the fire protection impact is. And the standard will, even if we get it in 13, we'll be behind forever.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. By the time we get it figured out and get the testing and get it added to the book, it's already completely different.
Well, they're also modular. And when you start thinking about these businesses and their growth, for it to be modular and adding and then having to protect more, you can't just prescriptive base it.
You know, we've done a bunch of tests where we've taken actual systems, not simulated systems, but real systems that are out there, set them up, sat and looked. I remember we had a in-rack arrangement that we were going to try. It was different than 834. And we fabricated a pipe, had it delivered. We were going to hang the pipe in the rack and went to hang the pipe in the rack. And the position of the in-rack was we had less levels, but the position with intervals down the length of the rack was exactly what 834 had prescriptively said. We're trying to do something a little different with less levels. And we went to put it in, there's like a gusset plate. It's about a foot tall and about 10 inches wide that's at the rack upright, which is right beside where we put the sprinkler. So my sprinkler is going to be literally behind this gusset plate. And I was talking to our guys who had designed all this. I said, why did you put it? He said, and we talked to the manufacturer of the rack system, and he sent us Revit files, but it didn't include that. He said, you didn't need to know all that. It'd be too unwieldy of a file. I'm like going, so if somebody followed 834 and put it exactly where 834 said to put it, it would be behind a plate and blocked and obstructed. And there are no obstruction rules in a rack other than you don't be below the beam or above the beam. And so immediately I said, we're not testing that way. So we actually took the pipe, slid it forward, slid it back, had it bungee corded, and started flowing water. And sat there and looked at it and said, okay, I think this is the best place. We didn't have time to refab the pipe.
Oh, for sure. You're already in them testing.
And, but every one of these is different. Everyone's different. And if we're feeling like we can take a cookbook recipe out of NFPA 13 or 834 even, and apply it to every system, it has to fit without using some common sense and logic. I have kind of pushed the idea that, hey, you're a manufacturer who makes ASRS. If you bring it to market, you got to come with validated fire protection. Now they all like, ooh, don't make that. Ooh.
I think it's a good transition too, because the topic came up when the ASRS came up, and I'm going to kind of ping off of something that you mentioned slightly, but the whole extinguishment thing, because some of these ASRSs, you're going to have to get a variance that the fire department's not going to enter. Right? So can you allude to, or a little more information maybe on the extinguishment that we may have to think about?
Well, and I know there are some public inputs that came in on 13 about extinguishment. I think I did some of that. Mark Hopkins did some of that. Actually, him and I put in some very similar things and did not talk to each other. So, wow, that's crazy. Awesome. But I think final extinguishment it's never been a thing in the past for us generally. It's like, well, the fire department will do final extinguishment. That's their job. You have an ASRS system that's 200 feet wide, 400 feet long, narrow 2-foot aisles, if aisles at all. Are they going to be able to deal with that? The Tupperware fire many years ago in Hemingway, South Carolina. It was kind of an ASRS. It was not what we've got today. It was quite crude, but a conveyor would bring a plastic tote in with rubber Tupperware product in it, And they would roll through this flow-through rack that was probably a couple hundred feet deep, several hundred feet long. They had a fire. They had some end racks in there. There was some other, they didn't have any flue spaces. They had these tracks that blocked all the flue spaces. The fire was under control, wasn't like going out of control, but they couldn't get to the fire. The fire department spent 24 hours plus trying to get water on this thing. It was in the middle of the array. They couldn't get there. They would shut the sprinkler down to try to get more visibility. They ended up taking a traco and ripping the roof open. They were going to try to go from an aerial ladder down into the thing. Didn't work out so well. Burned to the ground, completely to the ground. And I think we've got plenty of warehouses out there that the arrays are so large, the fire service cannot get, even the height. You get a rack array that's 50, 60 feet high with a 4-foot aisle, and you're going to send a guy down that aisle with a hose, and he's going to hit what's at the top.
No lights and smoke.
We have to think, we've had some fire tests where we've actually had extinguishment. There are rack arrangements that are more easily protectable than others. And I've actually, this one manufacturer, I said, why don't you sell that as part of your value of your system? And they said, oh, nobody will buy that. And I keep hearing that. I said that earlier. How do we polish up, and well, I shouldn't say it this way, but polish up the turd?
Yeah. No,
And
that's good, on our K-Factor podcast. We'll take that.
But with the in-racks, I think, some of the folks now have in-rack arrangements and stuff with, Reliable has the N252, and I think it was Tom Moulter back then, he said, nobody wants it. Why don't you do something in in-rack? He said, nobody wants an in-rack. I said, you polish up that turd enough, they will.
Maybe a bow tie.
And maybe a bow tie, there you go.
Nailed it.
Oh, I did not mean that.
I'm not sure if that was a compliment or not.
We've got a good polish to him. He's good.
But all of this stuff we got to sell better, I think, in terms of what it can produce. When I've had people see very successful limited smoke output and then see one that passes but not nearly as good, they're like, they understand what one looks like versus the other, right? How do we do that? I mean, I'm doing it a little bit where I have a customer that's paying me to show them and stand in front of this thing and look at it. But rank and file people out there, just follow the standard.
Going against the grain and not being afraid of performance-based design, I think, is a huge cultural
It's
change that we have to make with the challenges that are here or upcoming.
And some of this costs money too, if you want to know stuff. And people go, I don't want to do that. But we've been fortunate enough to have people that want to know. And actually, I've been quite honest with them and said, do you really want to know? Because you may not. We've tested some things that I said, I don't think this is going to produce results that you will be happy to see. And I often say, are you willing to do what it takes to address the information that you get? Good or bad. I said, I want you to be conscious of that and don't come back going, well. But I'm sure there's tests that have been run that, like, let's shove that under the rug.
We didn't do that one.
Nobody's going to know about that. But I've been fortunate to have some customers in the past that were willing to say, it's my building, it's my loss, it's my livelihood. If I stick my head in the sand because I don't want to spend the money, then whose fault is it? Mine. And that's, most of them at the right level understand that. And we got to promote that somehow out there.
What's that process like? Because we always say, or we're in design school, and if you read the annex of the commodity classifications and all of this, or you can do testing, right? Comparative testing, which a lot of products, especially now with technology, probably should. How do you start that process?
With like a lab or whatever. I think you could test, certainly UL has a commodity classification test, FEM has a commodity classification type style test. FEM is different, it's a bigger array, probably a little more accurate in what it does. The commodity classification test is not perfect in any way, but it certainly gives you baseline information. We've done a whole bunch of stuff out there, whether it's apples, apriums, pork stew meat, eggs, anything. Somebody says, well, what does this burn like? And I think it is important. I mean, commodity classification, I did one, I don't know if I did it here at AFSA, I know I've done it at NFPA. you guys, and one of the things when I put it up there and read the actual rules in the book, it scares me. How do you even read those words and make a, but my experience with commodity classification, usually the owner, you'll ask, what do you have? They understand kind of some of these break points. Oh, I got class 4 commodity. We have, it's not very
what
bad.
it is.
And that's a little too quick.
Right.
And then, again, I have the thing about, listen, it's your building. If you want to take a risk, I want you to know you're taking it. It's like that I explain some of the commodity classification stuff, like for an owner. So, okay, I go to the emergency room, and I'm having chest pains. And they ask me what's going on, and I don't tell them the chest pain's going on. Am I stupid? He said, well, they may want to, they would think something's wrong with me. Well, what? It's kind of like the commodity classification. If you want to lie about what you think you're going to store in the building so you can get a cheaper system, you're going to get the result of inadequate protection. You might lose a building. But, it's just a mindset. It's about fire protection doesn't really help me, doesn't do anything, doesn't make me money. It does save you money ultimately. If you have a building, a distribution center, and there was one, a fire, it was literally, I think, $1 billion. Who's got $1 billion to lose?
I know.
I don't know. If I did, I'd be retired.
Yeah.
If I did, I'd have a house that could have a yard with a barbecue pit.
Well, it's
Yeah.
true. But I guess we should also PSA this: if we end up in the ER with chest pain, it's probably from the hot wings that we're partaking in. Like,
Yeah. I might want to come watch this. 'Cause now that I said what I said earlier, you're
Oh,
like,
yeah.
oh.
This is
I don't know.
like your customers. The least I knew about this, the better off I was.
Oh, you felt like you were,
Now
right?
I'm like, yeah.
We're cooked.
We're good. Which standard has changed the most during your tenure? Or the most drastically?
They've all changed. I know, 13, when I first started, literally I could fold it in half and put it in my back pocket. And now it's 1.25 inches thick, 1.5 inches thick, whatever the heck it is.
And
It's,
growing.
I do think I would like to see an NFPA 13 very simplified. I'd like to have very few rules, real rules, and a lot of explanation of what we want you to do. Like as an engineer,
Yeah.
let me be an engineer. Tell me the end goal, give me some benchmarks to hit, and let me figure out how to do that. Versus the rule says it can't be more than 18 inches, or it must be at least this. And I go like, where did that come from? And I've been in the room sometimes and go like, I know where it come from. We were trying to get out of the room. Somebody wanted 24,
Sure.
somebody wanted 12. Boom, 18 sounds good enough. And we walked out. But when there are people who say, if the max is 18 and you're 18 and 1/8,
Yeah. Game over.
it's game over. You're not compliant. I talk about like you're out in your car, you're driving down the highway, you're on the interstate, and it's 65. And you get pulled over and they say, oh, excuse me there, you're doing 66 miles an hour, here's your $200 ticket. Would you be a bit aggrieved? Would you probably say disparaging things about the cop who pulled you over?
I'd argue the average speed that I was doing among the whole trip.
Yeah. But I do see that out there in the industry where people are pulling tapes and saying, yeah, you're slightly over, slightly. Does it meet the objective? Why does the thing even exist? And I don't think we've gotten so caught up in the compliance and age, all of it, that we forget the end goal of what we might be trying to do.
I've never thought of the potential issue of the prescription is where we're at, and you take it too literal, almost.
We do.
Yeah.
And but there's times where being in committee meetings and you realize that this was a made up number out of thin air, and we treat it as if it was chiseled in stone, brought down from the mountain. You crack open NFPA 13 and angels start singing. No, it's not. We're trying to hit that, Russ Levitt talks about reasonable all the time. You hear, I've over and over again, I use the same thing about, it's reasonable, it's not perfect. And we have to accept that, and shoot for that. And I think reasonable, that what I talked about earlier, the tiers and stuff, I think reasonable depends on what you're doing. You talked about a nursing home. If you're in a unoccupied warehouse and you got one painted sprinkler, you're not going to lose your mind over it.
No.
But if you were in a hospital room where your mother was and she was, gravely ill, you might say, oh, you got to do something about that. But it's perspective. And one size does not fit all, in my opinion. You have to use some judgment out there.
And to tie the conversation, I think, back together is getting new people in to ask why. So, I mean, you might have been 2 or 3 code cycles before you've thought about this again to say, hey, okay, really, why did we do this?
I
It's
think
good.
one of the things that I think NFPA's done a much better job as a staff liaison, the chair of committees, is trying to put together a good committee statement that explains that why. And I've been guilty in rooms where somebody says, yeah, matter meets our intent or something like that.
Right.
What does that mean? I know some of the staff liaisons now, certainly the chairs. There was a meeting recently where I think Chad Duffy, we were trying to write a substantiation and it was weak. And Chad finally said, if you can't write a better substantiation as to why you did it, you might need to rethink whether it was correct. And it flipped. And I was like, Chad, that went my way. And what the heck? But I'm also appreciative that he did that. I said,
Right.
that is, we have to help people. And that's what I talked about, like very few rules and good explanation. We're not, all of us have minds and we can think. If you explain something the right way, I think we'll get better results. When you're told you have to do this and not why, it's like my kids, you're not going. Well, why? Because I said so.
Sometimes.
Not
That
only
doesn't
we need
get-
an explanation, we need a good explanation, because sometimes we'll ask questions, and the answers we get is, well, it's because we've always done it that way. Why have we always done it that way?
I think you're right.
Let's make a change. If the change is wrong, turns out that was done that way for a very specific reason, we just maybe forgot.
Yeah.
We can go back and correct it later.
Yeah.
Maybe next cycle, we'll go back and fix it and go back the other way. But like, if you don't have a good reason for why it's this way, let's make the change.
You know, an interesting thing along that line, and with K factor, I guess being on K, it was, I was up at UL and we were going to run a fire test, and I had an assembled length of pipe and a sprinkler and some stuff that I said, well, I need to adjust the K factor because I've got some pipe connected to it, and we were trying to figure out what pressure to apply up at the pipe that it was connected to, and they said, well, you can use NFPA 13 and you can calculate Hayes and Williams and figure out and adjust the K, and I said, well, that's for aged pipe. I'd have to use a different C. I said, you know what? You guys have your K factor machine
K factor can.
right across the cannon. You've got it right across the way. I said, let me take this assembled piece and you generate a K factor. And the K factor is not an exact number. They run it at several pressures with flows and they average it and all that stuff. And I get all that. But I go over there. I've got my sprinkler connected to the pipe and I'm telling them to, connect it up to the cannon and get it going and whatever, and they grabbed a hacksaw and they were going to cut the frame arm off of the sprinkler. And I said, what are you doing? He said, well, I'm cutting that off. I said, why? He said, that's the way we do our test. That doesn't help me. I went, why? And he kept going on. I said, well, it will affect the K factor. You get back pressure. When that water hits the deflector, it creates a back pressure. It will limit the water that comes out. It will. How much? I didn't, I wasn't sure. And he said, well, no. And he was like, and then he finally agreed and said, okay, fine, we'll do it, but it's going to make a dang mess in here. Ding. I said, that's the reason you cut it off, because you guys don't want to make a mess.
Upsize your drain.
And then I talked to some of the folks at UL, and I said, guys, I'm not sure this is the right thing to do. And to their credit, they came back and they said, we did some tests with it on, with it off. It makes a little bit of a difference, but if you know in 13, there's a range. He said none of the sprinklers were out of range. It makes such a small difference. But as an engineer, and one of my things is everything matters. Everything matters. But the magic is what matters enough to worry about. You got to pick out that stuff. And that was one that didn't. But that was one when I really dug deep. I was going to understand why you cut it off, because otherwise water's flying everywhere and you don't want to get wet.
But it's good to know that they did the testing and that it didn't make a difference, because they could have easily gone the other direction. They could have done the testing. It could have made a huge difference. And said, oh, okay.
And he did, to their credit, it was Kerry Bell. Yeah. Kerry said, yeah, he said, you, okay, well, I'll check it. And he's a phenomenal, and he's the guy that wants to know, right? And I kind of like that idea. I want to know, and then I can make an informed decision. And some of the testing we do and all that is like pushing that limit, saying conventional wisdom, just because we've always done it, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
So while we're on the K factor discussion, we've got a question for you. And that question is, what type of sprinkler would you be and why?
Oh, God.
That's a good one. Caught him off guard. I like it.
Well, I'm going like, hey, I don't, well, what attribute do I want to display, you know?
Tells a lot about a person.
You know, do y'all normally ask this question of people?
Every
or is
once
that
in a
new
while.
one? Yeah,
Every once in a while. Or a type of system. You could go that route too.
well, and I'm trying to think of something clever to say, I guess, you know, oh, how do you do this? I certainly, would hope that it would be something that would be quite effective. I might be an in-rack sprinkler because I feel so good about how well they perform, and I feel like that's, if your job is to perform well and do the right thing and all that, I would hope that would be something, you know, integrity-wise, you would probably want. But the in-rack that is a vilified animal. No, not a single customer has ever said, I want, well, I take that back. That Tupperware fire I talked about, we were hired to go look at the sister facility, same rack system, same problems. I said, guys, we need to open up the flue spaces. We need to change the way this, and they said, we're not doing that. We'd have to tear the entire rack down, not doing that. Do whatever you got to do to make the system right. I had in-rack sprinklers probably every 2 feet apart, vertically, every 4 feet apart, 4 or 5 feet apart horizontally. And I think it was 30 miles of sprinkler pipe in that rack. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of sprinklers in there. And I met with the owner and they said, are you sure that's enough? I said, I've never heard anyone. Are you sure that's enough in-racks? Like, oh my Lord. But
Let's double up.
But I really feel like, I think we should probably put more in-racks in, just because they perform much better. They will give the customer the ultimate end of the day result they'll be happy with. And none of us in many cases think about the customer. It's the AHJ and the contractor and the engineer arguing over something. And the owner's over there going like, I don't know, you guys want to charge me more money. They want to enforce me and shut me down. And I don't know what you guys are over there doing. But if we could educate them and bring them into the fold, I think we would be a lot, and show them what good protection. I think, like I said earlier, we all want the best we can afford in most everything else you have in your life. White and sprinklers, something like that.
What do you look forward to most coming to AFSA convention and expo?
And there's so many things. And I was telling Bob something about it. I said, you guys have this unique mix of, you guys do a phenomenal job of having fun engagements, fun parties, fun things that bring people. I mean, people come to this conference because it's fun, just literally fun. The educational opportunities, the things, the presentations that get done, technically phenomenal, right? And then the interaction that you get with people in the industry. I think one of the things we talked earlier about collaboration and code committees. A lot of collaboration I do. I come and talk to people about ideas that I'm having about 13, and I think I'm gonna walk into the room, you know, at the next meeting. Here's what I'm gonna be bringing. Here's some ideas I have. You know, beat that, like John Dithart. I said, hey, you know, beat this up a little bit for me, because I want to understand your angst, and for the betterment of the industry. And I think that there's so much, all elements of this conference really hit. It's fun, it's educational, and it allows the interaction and camaraderie collaboration amongst the group to do better in the
when
industry.
you bring it up at the committee level, it's going to get taken apart. So I'd rather go
Absolutely.
find a couple people that I know are very smart, have them pick it apart, figure out, okay, does this still make sense? Is this where I want to go? Did they bring up a good point I hadn't thought about?
Well, there's many times in that committee room you hear something, and I've sat there and go like, I am convinced this is awful, this is great. Somebody speaks and you go like, you know what?
I was wrong.
Good point. You know, and I've seen you guys do that in committee meetings and stuff. Kevin, I think one time I brought something up, he looks at me, goes,
Touche.
just sat back and he said, fair enough.
Yeah.
And I think that we all need to be open-minded and willing to listen. My way or the highway doesn't work. You got to say, listen, I want to know what's good for the industry, what's good for the owner. I think we sometimes do forget about the owner at the end of the day. We believe they want the cheapest system. And sometimes they vocally tell you that. But if you were to give them enough education, they may decide, I don't really want the cheapest. Because if I have a fire, do you want to be back open in hours or days or months or years? It's up to you. I like the idea that people should have the ability to take a risk. Not necessarily with people's lives and all that stuff, but property. If you want to burn your building down, and it costs you $1 billion and nobody gets hurt, that could be a success if you're willing to accept that. But when you come back later and go, well, why did you let me do that? I didn't let you do anything. You said you chose to go that way.
Well, really appreciate it. It's always great talking with you, learn so much, and it's great to allow our viewership to get that piece when they're driving down the road in their truck. Really appreciate you being on.
And I appreciate you guys having me, and I appreciate what you're doing with this. I mean, I think that one of the things, and I think this is part of what I said, educating the industry, educating people. And I think, I don't know how many owners are listening to you guys, but people need to start listening to this and getting knowledge about what fire protection is all about and what they can do to help improve or reduce their risk or improve their circumstance. And it's a phenomenal effort to get out there and do that, because so many people, nobody knows about fire protection, hardly, they don't know all the details. But I appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you.
This has been the K Factor Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share wherever you tune in to podcasts, or head over to our website for more. Reach out to us anytime at technical@firesprinkler.org. Stay safe and always learn as we keep the fire protection conversation going.